Welcome to the NASDAQ studios in Times Square, New York. We're talking biopharma today with Mr. Kevin Buchi. He is the president and CEO of TetraLogic. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me here today. It's an honor. Thank you.
So, Mr. Buchi, tell me what you exactly do. What are those molecules?
You know, it's interesting. There is a fundamental mechanism, we believe, that turns a normal cell into a cancerous cell. It's a process called apoptosis, or dysregulation of apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. It's a natural process in our bodies. Every year, cells which are damaged or decayed are cleared by this process. In cancer, it seems to become dysregulated, and we think we can restore the normal regulation of the process. So we have a molecule going into clinical trials that, if it's successful, should be able to be used in a wide array of different tumor types to essentially cause the cancer cell to go through this natural death which it should go through.
So what do you have on the pipeline right now?
We've got a molecule called birinapant. We're doing studies in ovarian cancer, which are just starting up. We've got a study in a disease called myelodysplastic syndrome, which is a blood cancer, which will be starting up in the near future. And we're also doing work, interestingly, as an antiviral. The same mechanism that cancerous cells use to avoid cell death, virally infected cells also use that. So we're going to be doing a study in hepatitis B as well.
Wow, isn't that very far-reaching?
Got a lot going on.
So yep. The cure on cancer, the cure on
well,
viruses?
I don't know about the cure. Let's one step at a time. But certainly, if it works, certainly it would be a major step forward. It's a very revolutionary approach. We're the only company really going with this approach towards cancer. So it's very exciting.
What are the biggest challenges?
Oh, I think the first challenge, of course, was getting an IPO, getting the financing, getting the funding to be able to do these large clinical trials. The second challenge is just the science itself. You know, we know so little about how our bodies actually function that you're never quite sure whether the approach that you're going to take is actually going to be sufficiently robust to lead to a drug which will actually help patients. So we need to work through the FDA process, do the clinical trials which are required, and see where we end up. We should have a very good answer within 12 to 18 months, I think.
You're a small company,
yep.
And in your industry, there are very big guys. Mm-hmm. How do you compete?
You know, it's interesting. The science tends not to compete, right? We compete against the science. We compete against our knowledge of how our bodies function. But I don't really view other pharmaceutical companies as necessarily being competitors. I mean, I'd love to buy Pfizer at some point in the future, but that's probably not going to happen in the next couple of years. You know, it's more a challenge. More of the challenge is the challenge to find something which works in a particular disease. If you do that, then you can be successful, almost regardless of what other companies in the area are doing.
Has the Obamacare impact your business or your outlook in any way?
I think probably not in the near term, but I think in the longer term, there's a lot of investor nervousness and fear about drug pricing going forward. Are the economics of the drug industry going to remain the same? Are we going to be able to generate the revenues necessary to support the research and the very, very expensive clinical development? But it's had no real near-term effect yet, other than on financing.
Your earnings, EBITDA, are still in the red,
yep.
14 million.
Yep.
When will we see black numbers?
I would hope that by 2017, if everything goes well, if we're successful, we should have a very successful product on the market, again, depending upon the results of clinical trials. But as you know, our industry is characterized by huge amounts of spending before you get on the drug on the market, and then that enormous investment earns a big return on the back end if it works.
And what's bigger in your company, the scientific part or the business part?
It's the scientific part. The challenge really is the science. It's the early stage scientists trying to figure out the mechanism, how these things work, and then it's the clinical research regulatory groups trying to work with the FDA and work with the regulators to run the clinical trials that are necessary to get the drug approved. The big spend is on the clinical side. Those trials are very, very expensive.
And is there any way of managing scientists when working with them?
Herding cats?
How do you manage to work with a team of businessmen and financial people
I'm a bean counter by training, right? So I tend to focus more on the business side. We have very, very talented people within our organization, within my team, who manage the clinical research part of it, manage the scientific part of it. I don't have enough breadth of knowledge to be able to be particularly helpful to the scientists. I focus more on the business side.
Yes, because you're not a scientist.
That's correct. It's member of a team. You need to be a part of a team.
What do you think is the big difference in a pharmaceutical company led by a scientist and another one led by a businessman?
I think you need a fundamental understanding of both to be able to run a pharmaceutical company. I think you need an understanding of the scientific process. Doesn't mean you need an in-depth understanding of the mechanism around the products, but you need to understand how the process functions, how the clinical research process functions, and how the business process functions. For many, many years, I worked for an excellent scientist who was also an excellent CEO. I think you can have both types of people run the company, but you need to understand the organization that you're managing.
Who's your role model as a CEO, or what would you like to?
I worked for a guy called Frank Baldino for many, many years, who founded and ran Cephalon, the company I worked for before TetraLogic. He passed away from cancer about 2 or 3 years ago. He was a superb scientist, great manager, great businessman. He's kind of my role model. I don't think I'll ever achieve that, but he's who I focus on.
Well, Mr. Buchi, thank you very much for being with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for your time.